Welcome to the Revenue Rewired podcast, hosted by StringCan Interactive's visionary CEO, Jay Feitlinger, and no-nonsense COO, Sarah Shepard. We're here to accelerate your revenue and give your marketing purpose. So, Jay, welcome to today's episode of Revenue Rewired. We are going to talk about...
Or good afternoon for you.
Yeah, it is. It's almost evening. I'm in jolly old England. Gosh, I'm
That
going to
was
get
so bad.
so annihilated with that. I do not do accents, clearly. But I am going to talk about ghosting. So ghosting, I don't know, Jay, have you ever been ghosted before
In
in
personal or
anything?
professional?
Like it has such a large application, so you could get ghosted in recruiting, applying for a job, or even ghosted by a candidate. I've been ghosted by candidates.
Or
You
my
could get
kids?
your kids totally could ghost you. They ghost you like, yeah, we'll show up for this thing 5 hours later, or you get ghosted when you're trying to date someone, they're gonna ghost you. You could get ghosted in marketing. Like you fill out a form and you never hear from the salesperson again, which is exactly what we're going to talk about today because it is a massive leak in revenue and pipeline. And that's ghosting. And it's awful. And it causes so many problems, really totally avoidable. And then we're going to share with you how to fix it.
I love it. Let's do it.
All right. So if we're going to talk about ghosting, Jay, the first thing is we have a term for it that we call the ghost handoff specifically. Tell our audience, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, and I think, the perspective I have on this comes from the place where one of my two businesses ago that I owned, we had a pretty decent sales force. And that's really where I experienced it for the first hand, but pun intended. And so it gave me a new kind of empathetic view of how we support our clients. And so to make it as simple as possible, and you kind of already kind of touched on a little bit when you were talking through the examples, the ghost handoff is either from the perspective of the prospective client to the customer, or in the internal situation. So I'll focus on that for a second. On the marketing team side, we've heard this expression used often where they're seeing all these leads coming in off of their marketing efforts, and then they hear nothing from the sales team. Or worse, the sales team lets us know that they got a lead that sounded very interested in, buying their products or services. They reach out one, two, three times and never hear back. And so you can look at it from either perspective, where from the handoff point of view, it's just the engagement of who is providing the opportunity, and then connecting with them to, have a more engaged conversation about the opportunity.
So you're actually saying it's funny because I was thinking about it a little differently. Like you're talking about an internal handoff, right? Like marketing is
It could be
handing
either
off a lead.
or. But that's why I think, our mission at StringCan is really focusing on that sales and marketing alignment. And so I find myself thinking about things from both perspectives with all of this stuff around the sales and marketing efforts, where first looking at the external side, I think that's really obviously the most important, and figuring out how to button that up and figure out why you're being ghosted from prospective new clients. Because if they filled out a form, they showed interest, unless it was a bot or something. But we're moving that discussion for a second because we don't want to confuse the conversation. But if someone legitimately filled out a form off of an ad or some kind of thought leadership or content, and they showed interest, and then never want to follow back up when they're engaged with, that's ties into what you're talking about. But I also didn't want to forget that we need to be sensitive to the internal teams, because that's where I hear a lot of frustration, both from marketing and sales departments, where they just feel like neither department do a really good job at sharing insights on how the engagement goes with that lead.
Which one do you think? And this is kind of a loaded question, but I mean, we probably don't have time to go deep into both, but which one do you think probably has the most impact negatively long term to revenue?
I would say probably let's focus on the internal side is where my mind is going, because it's the area that I think we can impact the most. And I think we have a lot of stories and experiences around how to really improve that internal alignment. Because without that, I think the external forces will feel the disjointedness of the touch points and the funnel experience and whatnot. And so, my advice would be for this show, unless you feel otherwise, is we focus more on the internal ghosting part first, and then we could do a future podcast on what can be done on the external side.
I like it.
Okay.
And, you know, I think too, it's probably a more foundational piece. Like when you are being ghosted, sales leaders are typically trying to handle that in the best way. It's a little further downstream, I think. But when it's internal, I mean, really, like who owns that? Who owns that conversation when you're seeing the ghost handoff? Because both sides could easily point fingers at each other. And we've studied this where we read, Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. And I think like having that kind of attitude in your culture could potentially address some of this. But from a leadership perspective, who owns the handoff and why is it, happening in a ghostly fashion?
It's a tough one. I think it does depend on the situation, how established the company is, and what they do. But I feel like there is a bottom up and a top down mindset here. So, to be fair, I think in all scenarios, I really think from a culture perspective, and you already mentioned the word leadership, that is where I think the process needs to start. If the company doesn't prioritize reducing the ghosting handoff situation and making sure that there is alignment between the various departments, that's more than half the problem. Half the battle needs to be solved there. So I would say if you really take a hard look at yourself, your company's culture and process of how you all work together, look in the mirror hard. And if you're like, you know what, we really aren't doing a great job here, not intentionally being toxic, but some of that stuff just naturally happens if the company is set up where things are so siloed that teams aren't working hand in hand in unison.
Mm.
So I would say that has to be addressed first. And that's probably with every company. But on the secondary side, I got to say, the buck stops with the person. I have seen many organizations that had an extremely driven, person in either a marketing or sales role. They have voiced frustration to our team, so I'm not going to disclose the client names to protect their, you know, anonymous nature. But we've heard from many of the clients where they just feel like their leadership teams aren't improving that cultural part. And so now that person has a choice to make. They either could just put up with it, they could feed into the toxic nature, or they could make a difference and hopefully lead by example. And so we have numerous clients where I'm sure you could think of the person I'm thinking of, is she doesn't allow some of the issues with their company's culture and or the other departments prevent her from being successful. And so I watch her constantly pushing, those hard, running to the danger and pushing those hard conversations with her various departments. And I'm seeing a significant positive impact, which then is turning into, okay, wow, this really could work if you put the effort in. And so I just have to say that, unfortunately, if you do work at a company that has this issue and it's not a place that you want to leave, and I'm hoping that you wouldn't just give up. But I think if you take it upon yourself to think about what you can do to really help show the value of reducing the ghost handoff stuff, I think that'd be really, really positive. I'm
That's
curious, what do you think
interesting.
about, all of that? Have you seen that happen? And even like with our own internal stuff regarding, that challenge and where you think it starts with?
Yeah, it's kind of like it kind of reminds me of the recruiting question I used to ask, and that was really the point was ownership. Can you take ownership without being expressly told to do a thing? And kind of a self, how much of a self motivator are you? And the question I used to ask was, if you see a dirty cup in the sink and it's not yours, what do you do? And really,
Leave it.
the answer, leave it.
My wife would love that answer. Sorry, Rachel.
Please write into the show if that is correct, Rachel. Thank you. But, ultimately you want someone to say, I'm just going to put the cup away. It's not a big deal. And so I think like leaders are stuck in a position of they want to empower, but they also need to drive. And it really is a fine line. And I think it really is the challenge of leadership is walking that fine line all the time. You're going to slip off left and right. But there was an example in a book I read recently where they talked about this hat being in the middle of the floor, and everyone was walking around this hat on the floor. And it was no one's hat, clearly. But at some point, someone needed to pick up the hat and hang it up. And I think it's kind of like that, like the sales handoff. It's ultimately if you care about the revenue driving your organization, you will find a way to fix that problem versus, you know, trying to make sort of quick fixes like over automating or,
Hmm.
pawning it off on another department or anything like that. So, if you were to ping maybe one of the worst ways in which you saw someone trying to solve a ghost handoff problem, or the best way, whichever one's coming to mind, what would have come to the forefront for you there?
I'll go the negative one because unfortunately I have a lot of examples there. And as you know, it's one of my biggest pet peeves with people, but it's the passive aggressive nature. And I've been blind copied on a bunch of this, and obviously, we're agnostic when it comes to the CRM side, but we have a lot of clients on tools like HubSpot. And so obviously we have a lot of access to, all the internal workflows and how the internal teams are talking together. So marketing can get data from sales on improving the campaigns and then vice versa. But I've seen numerous situations come into play where I know for a fact, and I probably have the context, where I know the salesperson isn't fond of the marketing person or vice versa. And I don't want to read into it too much, but the tone of some of these items can just come across so condescending and it just feels very passive aggressive, almost like the marketing or the salesperson is just trying to cover their butt because they feel like they're not hitting their numbers, and they're going to be asked at some point what's going on. And I think people like passing the buck, and so that's probably the area where I just and I'll have to be honest, I've been guilty of this. Definitely earlier on in my career where when I'm really stressed out or overwhelmed, and reflecting on how I just acted, I'm like, oh, I didn't do it the right way. So I think to be human and give people some grace, I think everyone's going to have a bad day. But if you find yourself consistently following up with people to address or reduce this ghost handoff stuff, but your tone is very, inappropriate around, pointing blame or just very accusatory, I feel like that's just not going to develop trust. And that really, I think, causes the problem where if I was a salesperson and I had the marketing leader constantly hitting me up where I'm like making me feel like I'm not doing my job and micromanaging me, I'm going to start feeling icky, and I'm going to start not liking this person regardless of them delivering me quality leads or not. It just becomes very passive aggressive. And that's not healthy. And then I'm also not going to probably be very open and wanting to share and be vulnerable about ideas I have because I don't want I'm going to get, poo-pooed on. So that's where I think, is the opportunity. And then again, the positive side, I've seen the vice versa where I saw this from a recent marketing leader client of ours, and I really appreciated her approach where it's kind of like a facts based model where being super curious, I love, the book Curious George. And so came at it from a perspective of, hey, last week we got, four pretty solid leads from the trade show we just attended. It's been 3 or 4 days and I haven't seen any activity on these leads. I'd love to know is something I could do better to make it easier for you. Do you need a tool? Do you need more details? Do you need help with reminders? Are you just too overwhelmed with blah, blah, blah? And I think if I was a salesperson, I got talked to that way, I'd be like, wow, the person seems like they really do care. And then I will be a little more honest in my answer, maybe be like, oh my God, I missed it, or I'm overwhelmed, or whatever the situation might be. And so that's really, I think, from the positive side is if you approach it that way, as a support role versus be accusatory role, I think you're going to have obviously much better success.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of our former employees said the coolest thing to me when she started, and it was that assume positive intent. It was like a you know, a way of life. And it's amazing, especially when sales and marketing are like mortal enemies in so many company cultures that you don't do that automatically. It's like immediately they've done something wrong. And it's so much easier to assume positive intent because our brains are wired for survival and all this like negative stuff. It's just easier to default, I think, for a lot of people. And when you remember you're trying to do something together, and that's really, you know, I think any leader, they need to show from the top up. It's like when they get along, then the rest of the team sees the example of, oh, they assumed positive intent too. If I had struggles and saw potentially a sales and marketing leader, that got along and things were really collaborative, my team would feel so much more collaborative by default by watching the example happen. You know,
Yeah, I think on that note, where I think we've done a good job, especially because of you, is if you see a problem, depending upon your role and your relationship to that person's role, so for example, if you're a peer to them, it's a little harder to do some of this. What I think that we've done a really good job at our company is leveraging books and speakers and outside influencers to help spark the conversation of here's a different way to think. And then we use that to help have the conversation about individually as a team what we can do a better job with. And so to be fair again, when I've seen this happen on the client side, to your point there, it is hard because if you're like a sales manager and you're working with, let's say, a marketing manager, and there's people above both of you, when you're a peer essentially, and not the boss of the other person, it makes it a little harder to have some of these harder conversations. Which again is why 10 minutes ago I focused so heavily on like the culture part. I just feel like, if your company's having this issue, yes, you could be super direct and radical candor type of stuff and have the conversation. But if you're a peer, it might be hard. So maybe if the leadership does a better job at leveraging a book or a topic like we've done, that might help make it feel a little easier to improve some of this. Because it is it's easy to say, and as we know, it's hard to do.
I love using books to like communicate strategies for improving. That's not me saying it. It's us learning from someone. And so it puts us on an even playing ground. And I think that would be one of the things that I would say is one of the most impactful is how do you put everyone in an even playing ground? And that's one of the reasons why we got our EOS implementer is because I was facilitating everything and it just didn't feel non-biased because
Hmm.
naturally it was I'm very direct. And so anyway, I digress. But what I wanted to talk to you about next was okay, we have a pretty cool way in which we've been able to help people unpack the actual, I guess, cracks in the ghost handoff. And so I think one of the troubles with ghost handoff is it's not super clear where the drop off is. When you're running a relay race, you see exactly who dropped the baton, but was it the hand off or was it the grab? And so, even so, with slow mo, we can watch the Olympics and say, oh, it was both or it was her. But, gosh, that was so painful to watch this last summer. Oh my gosh. But, where exactly did it fall apart? And so, you have a really cool process to kind of unravel that and tell us about it.
Referring to the flow map stuff. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Making sure. Okay, wasn't sure where you were going with that exactly.
I mean, we do have a
um,
lot of processes for a lot of
no.
things, but yes, the flow
Um,
map.
so, this is one that I started doing at my last company, and I have to say it's been very powerful. And I relate it often to like the building the house analogy of like the architect and the blueprint. And so we chatted, the first part about this, about more of the relationship part of it, which again, it's all about conversation or communication. But I think if you don't have a roadmap to follow, it makes it a lot harder. And so we have found to help identify the obstacles or opportunities with our clients, one of the first things we have to do is map out and audit what they're currently doing and then to figure out what needs to happen. And so when you think about like a go-to-market type of strategy, regardless of your company is, been in business for 30 years or not, it needs to be thought from the perspective of I want to educate the audience out there regarding my product or service. I have to tell the story, understand the pain points, the audience, all the things. And so if you can map out the entire, flow, because again, that old mindset of like that customer journey map, it's just not linear that way. It's just a complete crazy roller coaster ride nowadays, especially with AI and all the things that are happening in the world today. And so if you just think about it from a human point of view, there are so many different touch points and experiences that could happen and all the, if this, then that type of statements. If you do like a flow map and you think about it from the customer's point of view and you take them through, a an engagement journey, I feel like it's much easier to identify, all those opportunities. And so that's really, I think, what needs to happen first is you just do a really detailed audit regarding exactly what you're doing today. And then when you step back and look at it from the lens of the ideal customer profile, the ICP, you're going to notice a lot of cracks in that. And now what a lot of companies will do is because they're kind of like changing the tire as they're driving, they'll put like, a piece of gum in a crack in a dam, which, might be fine for a bit, depending upon, I guess, the gum. But, eventually it's gonna cause major problems. And so you got to be strategic about at least the maybe next 12 or 24 months, but depending upon your sales cycle time frame regarding where the priorities are to fix. Once you have that flow map in place regarding the ideal situation between marketing, sales, customer service, and all the various different departments that are touching the customer, including, billing and all the things, because those touch points matter as well. Because again, you can imagine if the sales team or the marketing team are super warm and have that kind of personality, and then accounting comes at it from this very, cold tone, not saying that accounting always would be that way, but often, that's where that might come into play. That's not really a great experience, and you want all the touch points to feel consistent regarding your brand's personality. So that's really where I think you get a lot of clarity is like it's not really technical. It's not always usually a technical problem. It might just be that people don't know who owns what and things are just slipping through the cracks because there's not clarity. And then you don't have roles and responsibilities. And also I found that with the flow map, it's really important to have like one singular owner. I know a lot of times we work with clients and we're like, okay, who owns this process? They're like, well, it's 9 people. And obviously, if you have more than one person in play, you're gonna have a lot of potential issues regarding misunderstandings.
You know, I know we do this with like CRO or CMO types. What's interesting though is I thought about, okay, if I actually implemented this in a different way, what kind of outcomes? So one of the things I've started doing is testing things, my assumptions versus reality. And so I think it'd be a really interesting exercise to go through and map out what you think the customer experience is as
Huh.
of today and what you believe is actually occurring. So it's here's how the process starts, here's how they come in, and here's how it flows out. And this is the outcome. And then go back and kind of like validate at each point. Wow, this isn't even happening. Or there are 20 steps in here I didn't even know about between A and B. And I think that would be really eye-opening there to help you also unpack where the most impact would go if I were to execute the flow map, like to take it and make it a little bit more implementable today. That would be something I would start is exactly what my assumptions are versus reality. And then now I know exactly where the flow leaks are in my map.
I love that. Actually, let's start doing that because it does give you a perspective. Again, not to be coming sounding passive aggressive here, because I'm trying to avoid all of that and everything that we do. But I think what may be kind of interesting to your point there is leveraging that idea. Be like, okay, walk us through what you believe it should be, and then I think this is where I think an outside source that has really, in theory, no skin in the game per se,
Mm.
that has kind of like our background and kind of mindset around sales and marketing, an outside source coming in and then validating that, I think could be pretty powerful. Again, we've done a little bit of that obviously in the past with some clients and, don't kill the messenger. It is hard sometimes, but when you present back like, hey, we're not calling you a liar, but you told us this is what the process is supposed to be. And we did our research off of the last few weeks of, our auditing process for the flow map framework. And we actually found that, you're nowhere near as buttoned up as you believe you were. And so here's what we uncovered, and then here's how you solve it. And I would say, the ideal clients that we love working with are ones that are like, okay, that was a lot, but beyond appreciate the comprehensive view. Because often, if you're inside the business, it's hard to kind of see some of those missed opportunities.
And I would add that to the marketing agency support piece in there is if you have, sort of someone who doesn't have skin in the game, the agency should be able to then do a secret shopping experience and then map their reality to what your team is also expecting and
Yep.
seeing from the flow map side of things. And then you actually like could identify, oh, this is a tech problem, or oh, shoot, this was a simple project management process problem. I think it could also get you some low-hanging fruit and then really find out where you need to invest more energy because even with your team kind of going through the flow map, everyone's really emotionally invested in the process because they care. Otherwise, they wouldn't be having the conversation. I don't know, Jay, do we feel like we've shared enough? I mean, this was a beefy one.
Yeah, and I think that's really where it's powerful, and that's probably, I know we like to end with like the one takeaway. This we can obviously spend probably another hour on this discussion, but that's where I feel like the one thing that I would suggest, it's not rocket science. Again, if they want to reach out to us, which obviously I'll share that information here in a little bit to close this out. But I would suggest that, that probably be a really good exercise for people to do in-house, is to start that conversation of mapping out what is the current experience today against what the desired ideal experience would be. And then what we often recommend doing then is take that and look at other either direct or indirect competitors and see how they're doing it. And then try to build out like the world's best, experience on behalf of their ideal client. And that's really what I think, I hope people would take away from this conversation of, before you start pointing fingers and blaming people, I guess it's a combination of, fixing the culture, but then also through that process, you might identify that when you're doing this flow map exercise, that's where I think the cultural elements come into play. It's like, why is this a problem for us today? And I think you'll hear things from people that are going to be very eye-opening and sometimes painful, because you're going to hear things like, well, we do it this way because we've always done it this way, and we were told that we can't make a change, or whatever they might say. I think you're going to realize that what you believe your culture definition is not really what it is today and how people are practicing it. So lead by example and really improving that and this flow map. I think that alone could be a huge way to significantly reduce the ghost handoff. And then to wrap that part up, before I would love to hear from an operational perspective your thoughts, Sarah. But you might find that you could have the most amazing culture, you could have the most amazing world award winning flow experience for your clients, and you're still not having success. And that's where you have to dive back into the strategy and tactics of the marketing or sales, or potentially you might have the wrong people on the bus in the wrong seat, or maybe they shouldn't be on the bus at all. And again, we unfortunately have been asked by numerous clients, especially on the CEO level, where they're like, as you're working with our team, we would love any insights from you of who you don't think should be on our team, which obviously is a very awkward situation. But I feel like, if it's done appropriately, and us not kind of tattletaling, there is a really productive way in how an outside source can come in. And what we always do, which I think is really healthy, is let's first try to solve the problem. Is a problem your company or that person before you just give up on them? Because maybe you hired them for a reason originally. Maybe they just got lost along the way. And it might not be their fault per se. So I think you can find ways to really improve that too before you give up on somebody.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I was just gonna say for you, it's like I'd love to maybe wrap this up with any thoughts you might have as regarding kind of like next steps, from more from the operational point of view. Because you know me, I'm like anything is possible, and I think you do a good job at grounding me sometimes because I just do get too big, thinking sometimes around. I feel like this is all easy. I know it's not.
Yeah, I mean, I think why we like the flow map so much is that if you know the ghost handoff is one of the most expensive, if not the most expensive detriments to revenue ever. And it's totally preventable, I think, with the right process. And the flow map helps identify maybe not every single problem, but the ones that are causing the most pain. It's sort of that like top right grid. It's causing the most pain and it's costing you the most. And so, in order to fix the right things, don't invest energy like the 80/20 rule. Stop investing so much in the little things. If they're not mattering enough to impact your revenue in a huge way, then find that spot because I think everyone sort of has that. We've identified opportunities ourselves, even in our own agency, and kind of getting the facts really is what the flow map helps is here's what we think, the process should look like. Here's how it actually is going. And then you have a secret shop experience and it's like, no, this is actually how it is for someone else, not inside the company that doesn't have any of the knowledge or information you do. What assumptions have you been making about your customer that might not be true? And so I think it helps put everyone in the shoes of their customer. And I would almost suggest if you could do it just as an audit regularly, because you could optimize your processes versus trying to like chase reactivity. That would just be my operational perspective is use it as a tool over and over again, get really good at it, optimize it, and don't waste your time and energy trying to band-aid with gum and a dam. We know it's not juicy fruit. That is the worst. Or fruit stripe.
It's bubble
Fruit
gum.
stripe's not going to work. All right. Well, we hope this episode about ghost handoffs was informative and funny because,
Dad
that's
jokes, I'm
us.
sure.
Oh, you're so, yeah, let's leave those to the professionals. All
Great,
right.
thank
But
you.
you know what? If you want our flow map or some more information about it, you can email us at podcast@stringcan interactive and put flow map in the subject line, and we will know exactly how to help you. All right.
Love it.
Well, Jay, this was it for today. Look forward to seeing you guys next week and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye bye. Thanks for tuning in to the Revenue Rewired podcast. Send us your questions to podcast@stringcaninteractive.com and follow us for more insights to drive your business forward.